Okay, we're going to take a look at how to do a carburetor clean and rebuild. So first I want to go over what we're going to need. I usually like to have a couple different size screwdrivers, Phillips and flathead. I also like to have a larger flathead for the drain screw, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. I like to use some disposable gloves, either latex or nitrile. Keep your hands clean. Obviously our new carburetor kit, our carburetor cleaner, okay, and then our carburetor. And this is a carburetor off a 1997 120 Evinrude. So carburetor's our last part. Alright, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Let me just clean my area off here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to take the old carburetor apart. So to do that, it's going to vary based upon carburetor, but generally speaking, most carburetors are pretty much the same as far as how they come together and go apart. So we're going to want to take all of this old carburetor apart and basically get all of the gaskets and everything off of there. Sometimes these gaskets can be a little bit tricky. I usually start off with taking the float bowl off on the bottom, right? And if you have an electric screw gun, that may help if you're doing a bunch of these. On this particular outboard, there's 4 of these. It's a V4, so it may help save some time to use an electric screw gun to do this. All right, so we take the float bowl off. And we're going to set that aside and come back to that here in a minute. So we want to take the gaskets off, and this one actually inside looks pretty good. The gasket's actually in decent shape as well. So we're just going to pull this off. Just be gentle. You want to make sure that you don't bend any of the little copper pipes or whatever they are. There's a little bit of residue on there and a little bit of residue in here. I don't know if you can see that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get that all cleaned up. Next thing we have over here is going to be the little gasket. And let's see if I can go ahead and just peel that up. So we take off the old gasket there. Then around side, we're going to come and we're going to take off this plate right here and the gasket underneath it. So this is going to be a flathead. So we just go ahead and pull that off. Be really careful not to strip any screws. Sometimes on these things, if they haven't been taken apart or cleaned in a while, the screws want to stay on there, especially the drain screw, which is why I use a larger screwdriver. Okay, so we've got that gasket. We're going to pull that off. All right, so that's all apart. So let me just go ahead and set these pieces over here to the side. So now we're going to take apart the lower bowl, and this screw is the one that I'm talking about. This is why I use a larger screwdriver, because this screw is a little bit larger, and I've already loosened it up here, but sometimes this screw really wants to stay in there, and it's really easy to strip that screw off if you use a smaller screwdriver. So I like to get a real big one like this and just press in really hard and turn slowly. And then that will come right out. All right. Okay, then inside of the bowl, we've got our float in here. This float's moving pretty decent, so that's not too bad. But we do want to take this out and clean all in here, so we're going to just go ahead and remove the screw right here. All right, be careful with that screw too. You don't want to strip that one. Right, and then we just kind of drop this out, and you'll see it's going to come out with the seat right there and our needle. Okay, let's just throw that up there. And then we want to take our needle out. Now this is also why I would keep a larger flathead screwdriver around, because you do not want to strip this out. You want to be able to get it out of there. Now we will be replacing it. It's sometimes really tough to get out. So you just want to crack it. Just be really careful not to strip it. right? And then once you crack it, then there you go. And that actually didn't look too bad down in there. All right, so now that we've got everything kind of set aside and we're ready to go ahead and start cleaning this thing. So now you're going to go ahead and you're going to take your carb cleaner. You can just go to your local auto parts store. It doesn't have to be special marine carb cleaner. And you want to pretty much just go through this thing. We want to get all of the jets. So we got a jet right there. We want to clean all of this in out. And then we have other jets right there. We want to make sure we get all of that. We want to make sure that we get down in our bowl here, up underneath where the seat would be. And we just want to make sure we get this whole entire thing clean. So what I'm going to do is I usually like to keep a bucket around, especially if you're going to be working kind of indoors or anywhere, and make sure that you do this in a well-ventilated area. So I like to do my parts inside of like a bucket or some kind of bowl or something like that, just to make sure that I'm not getting carb cleaner everywhere. So you just really want to be liberal with it. Make sure you get all the holes and everything. And just stick your little needle down in there. Just make sure that you're able to apply some of that pressure and just get that stuff out. Trying to avoid backsplash here. And it might be a good idea to wear a mask normally. You don't want to get any of this stuff in your mouth for sure. Okay, let me just kind of get the outside of it. All right. That looks pretty good. Let me just get back in here one more time. All right, so I'm going to take that off, set that aside, let that dry. This stuff evaporates pretty quickly, so you don't have to worry about long dry times or anything like that. Now we're going to go ahead and just spray down the upper part of the carb. All right, if you do have any gaskets that are not rubber and like pieces of the gasket are sticking to this underside where the bottom of the carb meets the top of the carb, you want to make sure that you go ahead and clean those off really well. These particular carbs are plastic bodies, but you know, especially some of your older, lower horsepower models are usually going to use like a metal body carb. All right, so now here's the important part. We want to make sure that all of these little crevices and passages where the fuel would normally flow are free. That's the most important part, because if there's blockages in there, that could cause some operating issues, especially idling and higher speed. So we're just going to spray these out. You want to make sure that when you do that, you want to make sure that fuel comes out the other side. So that looks good. I'm going to come down here and we're going to clean out these little tubes at the bottom. Make sure those are nice and clean. Alright, those look good. Alright, and then just generally kind of go throughout it and just make sure that the whole thing just gets a good bit of carb cleaner in it. Be liberal with this stuff because you want to make sure that you get these things completely clean. All right, so that is the cleaning part of it. We're going to come back and we're going to finish off the reassembly with all of the new parts. Okay, now we're going to do the reassembly of the carburetor. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our new carb kit over here and we're going to just open this up and I'm going to go ahead and get this all buttoned back up. So let's take out our new parts. Let's not confuse them with our old parts. Let's keep those up here. And here we go. Okay, so in most cases, some of these carburetor kits will fit multiple carburetors, so there may be pieces that you don't actually use. Like in this particular case, this gasket right here is not used on this carburetor. So sometimes these kits come with parts that, you know, the kit fits a larger range of different carburetors. So we're not going to be using some of these parts in this case. So we're just going to go ahead and put this thing back together. First thing we want to do is let's go ahead and put this side piece back on with the gasket. Alright, so it's pretty simple here. Let me just find the right screws. Alright, this is going to be our flathead. So you want to tighten this down. These the screws on the carburetor don't necessarily need a specific torque. You just want to make sure that you get them, you know, nice and snug. Don't over torque it. You don't want to have issues getting the screws off later. Just snug it down just a decent bit. Alright, you just want to make sure that that gasket, it's tight enough so that the gasket completely seals the chamber there and doesn't let any air in or out or gas in or out. Alright, so there's the first part of it. So we'll go ahead and put that aside for now. And now the bottom part, and this is the important part, you want to make sure that you clean this properly. Actually, let me get some Q-tips and get some of the small crevices there. So what I'm doing is I notice a little bit of gunk kind of in the corners here, and sometimes that can be hard to get out. So I'm just going back over it with a Q-tip and getting those tight spaces. As you can see, I'm actually pulling some stuff out of there, so any little thing can cause issues with gas being able to flow correctly, especially in these old carburetors. So you want to make sure that if there's anything in there that you get it out, because you don't want to have problems while you're out on the water. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get down in there really good. Make sure any crevices where stuff could come free and clog these jets up, we want to make sure that we get that all cleaned out. Alright, and you may see just a little bit of film in there from the carb cleaner. That's okay, because once the gas goes in there, it'll burn that off. It'll carry that up and it'll burn it off. So it's just the gunk and the grime and the least particles and things like that. That's what we want to make sure that we get. Alright, so I got that cleaned out. So now let's go ahead and let's get the new float installed. So here's our new float, and here is the new seat and needle. Alright, so this will all come in one packet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this new seat installed. So we're going to put our little plastic washer on here, and we're just going to screw this down in place. Yeah, this is where I would use our larger screwdriver, because these are brass, and if you're not careful and your screwdriver is too small, you will strip these things pretty easily, and then you'll have issues getting them in and out. So just make sure it's on there nice and tight. Alright, so now we're going to take our new float, and we're going to put our little needle right on this little tab here. All right, so it just kind of rests on there. You just kind of clip it in place, and then we're going to take little post looking thing here and slide this all the way through. Okay, so what's going to happen is this needle is going to set down in there, down in the little seat. So I want to make sure that we get that in there. Sometimes this can be a little tricky, especially on camera. So let me see if I can get this up a little bit. It's not that big of a deal, but you just want to make sure that that the float can move freely. All right, so now we're going to screw this back in. Okay, and you don't want to screw down too tight. Okay, so that's a little too tight. So all right, so we want this float to be able to rock, because what happens is as gas runs through your carburetors, it goes down into this bowl and it fills this bowl up with fuel. Once this bowl fills up with fuel, it's going to lift this float up, which then depresses this needle down into the seat. And that stops the fuel from being able to enter the chamber. So that's what regulates the fuel flow through the carburetor. So it's important that this float right here is set correctly. Now, if you get yourself a manual, like this is a different type of carburetor, but you can see Evinrude and these types of motors have certain specifications on how the float should be set. So it'll give you a measurement on how much room that float should have when you're setting it. In this particular case, on this carburetor, the float is in the lower bowl. So basically, it's saying with the whole bowl inverted, you want to make sure that the float should basically just touch a straight edge. So if I were to run a straight edge across the bottom of this bowl, you would want the float to barely touch it. That's how that's basically how they want this set. And it looks like it's pretty well there. And the float seems to be moving. You see that when I flip it upside down, the float is moving freely. That means that there's nothing restricting the float from being able to move here, which is good, because you want that to be able to stop that in that seat. So consult your manual for your motor and determine in the manual how your float needs to be set, because that's going to be very important to make sure that your fuel flow is proper and not cause any issues when you get out there on the water. Okay, all right, so next up is going to be our gasket here. We're just going to set that in place. Or actually the gasket we'll set up here on the upper assembly. Okay, and this should just slide right down over top of everything. I think I may have gotten the holes wrong. There you go. Okay, so this slides right down over top of everything. And then we just go ahead and we put our top back down on top of it here. Oh, got myself backwards. Okay. So I want to make sure, actually let me go ahead and press this through. There's like a little notch here for this. And it's super tight, so you want to make sure that you get the gasket pressed all the way down onto that notch on both sides. That way it seats properly. Alright, so then I just go ahead and set this back down into place. And now I'm ready to screw this down. So I just take my 5 screws again, come back through. And again, you don't want these things you don't want to tighten these things too much. You want to tighten them so that it seals that gasket properly and makes it so that no air gets in or out, no fuel gets in or out. And I'll come back and I'll torque these things a little bit later. And what I like to do is I like to use kind of like a cross pattern torquing. So I'll torque one screw and then I'll go to the other side and torque that screw, and then I'll come back and I'll kind of do like a star almost as I'm torquing them down to make sure that I'm applying a pressure evenly all the way through. Right? So the last two things that we need to do is we need to install the new drain screw. So we've got that right here, and we're just roll the washer down on top of that. And we're going to install that right here in the top. And again, this is our larger flathead. Just want to tighten that down nice and snug. Oh, nope, I'm sorry. I just got that wrong. I just tried to put the seat screw back in place. Let me take that off. This is the old seat screw. Grab the wrong one there. Let me get my new washer off of there. Right here is our drain screw. And you'll know the difference between it because one has a hole and allows fuel to flow through it, whereas the other one does not. All right, so get that in there. And just snug it, just enough to keep the fuel from coming out of the bowl. All right, then the last thing that we have to do is come in and put in our new gasket up here, our new washer. This one can be tricky sometimes. You just want to make sure that you seat it in there and that it goes in like this little channel all the way around it. Sometimes it wants to come back out. You just have to work with it for a little bit. Once you get this thing seated, then you'll be ready to go ahead and put this thing back on your motor and get started. All right, so that is how you rebuild and clean a carburetor on an outboard motor.